topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, Merry Christmas and welcome. This is Bill Martinez, and we are live. Great to have you with us, sharing a part of your holiday with us. I hope you'll get a cup of hot cocoa and bring the family around and watch this special presentation about how much do you know about Christmas? About its origins, its many beloved traditions. Do you know where the idea of stocking stuffers comes from, or how lights found their way onto the Christmas tree, or why we all have jolly, red-suited, white-haired images of Santa Claus in our heads? Well, the American Minute creator and historian Bill Federer is with us to talk about the holiday's rich and unique history. Plus, we're going to recall some memorable miracles of the holiday period and Christmas especially. Bill Federer, welcome back. Good to have you with us. How are you? Merry Christmas to you.
Hey, Bill. Great to be with you.
Hey, how special is this that we get to enter into millions of households today on this Christmas day to talk about Christmas and help people realize that maybe some of the things, the traditions that we take for granted, where they came from and why they're so special. And maybe in the process of doing this, Bill, we can re-embrace, the special attributes of this holiday.
Well, it is exciting, and I would love to get into it. Matter of fact, I put together a book on this. It's called There Really Is a Santa Claus, The History of St. Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions. And the first question I ask is, why December 25th? And if you'd like, I could get into that.
Yeah, let's go right down. We got a little bit of time together. We're going to have a lot of fun with our audience, and they're going to be taking notes, no doubt, and sharing it with everybody, and just say, hey, do you realize how smart I am and all these things I know about Christmas now that I didn't know before?
Yeah, well, the first 2 centuries of Christianity, the date everyone was concerned with was Passover. And the Hebrew calendar had it as a lunar date. They're different Hebrew months, but the Romans began to convert to Christianity, and so the Christians in Greece and Rome would ask the Hebrews when Passover is. But as more and more of these Greeks began to convert to Christianity, they raised the question, well, when was his birthday? Hebrews did not celebrate birthdays. Matter of fact, we were visiting in Turkey, and we were with a family, and my wife asked the woman of the house when her birthday was. She goes in the back room, shuffles through some papers, and comes out with it. I mean, she didn't even have it memorized.
Wow.
My son worked in Korea for several years, and everyone turned a year older on January 1st. They did not celebrate birthdays. And so this was sort of a Greek thing. And so it's a little bit of a detective story, but it's quite fascinating. So the book of Luke, chapter 1, says in the time of Herod, and Herod died anywhere probably around 1 BC, maybe a year or 2 earlier than that. In the time of King Herod, there was in Judea a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. What's this priestly division of Abijah? King David divided the Levite priests into 24 divisions, and Abijah was number 8. And we also have to notice the first division was Jehoiarib, and that's going to come into the picture in a moment. So we have these 24 divisions, but we don't know when they took their turn. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered, and then the Hebrew University, 1962, in Caesarea, discovers the scrolls with the 24 priestly division schedule. Family took 2 weeks a year, 6 months apart, to do the work at the temple. And but then another part of the detective story is, well, when do we start keeping track? And a clue comes with the date of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And the Jerusalem Talmud and different Jewish records say that the priestly order that was on duty when the temple was destroyed was Jehoiarib, and it was destroyed the first week of August in the year 70 AD. So if Jehoiarib is the first division, they're on duty the first week of August, and the Abijah division is 8 weeks later. That would be the last week of September.
Right.
Now, this is an important week because this is the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles, and this is when Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, would have been in the temple. The angel appears to him, tells him that his wife's going to conceive. He goes home, she conceives, and so the Byzantine Rite Church celebrates September 23rd as the conception of John the Baptist.
Right.
Why is this important? Well, the book of Luke says that in Elizabeth's 6 months of pregnancy is when the angel appeared to Mary and she conceived. And so the date of the Annunciation, when the angel appeared to Mary and she conceived of the Holy Spirit, is March 25th, right? So September, last week of September, Zechariah's on duty, his wife gets pregnant. 6 months after the last week of September is the last week of March. And if Mary conceived the last week of March, then 9 months later is the last week of December, or December 25th. So there's a biblical historical way to verify the December 25th date. People say, well, wasn't that Saturnalia? Well, Saturnalia was December 22nd. So why would you pick December 25th? And then people say, well, what about sheep's in the field and the climate in
exactly.
Bethlehem is pretty warm. It's like Flagstaff, Arizona. And so it is not that far conceivable that December 25th is the actual date. Now, some people may think otherwise, and we don't want to get into arguments because there's enough things to argue over in the church today. Right. But there is evidence that it very well could be December 25th.
Right. No, well, you bring up the argument because that's I've heard that the shepherds wouldn't necessarily be out in the field during the month of December, right?
Yeah. So in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, which is 6 miles away, it gets down to 40 in the winter and a high of almost 60 in the winter.
Right.
So it's fairly moderate, and then you can go on to farm websites. I went to one. It was a farm in London and called the Warhorse Valley Country Farm Park. And it says lambs are born around 145 days or 4.5 months after the ewe falls pregnant. Lambing can start as early as December and go on as late as June. So it's not like a fixed season, and December is one of the days, the months.
Yeah.
That it was.
So it's not out of the zip code, so to speak, right?
Right.
Right.
And but one of the things I talk about in my book is everything on planet Earth is dated to Jesus's birthday.
Exactly.
And now you had the pagans actually, it's even in the Bible. They would date things according to the reign of kings in the 10th year of King Hezekiah, or the 14th year of Tiberius Caesar, and so they were dating things according to Diocletian, who was a terrible emperor who killed Christians. And in the 5th century, there was a monk, Dionysius Exiguus, and he's going through his monk records, keeping track of dates. And he's like, why are we dating things to this Diocletian who killed Christians? So he counts back as best as he can figure to the birth of Christ, and it catches on, and it becomes the dating system for the whole world.
Wow.
And so I love the quote of Clarence Mannion, but so even those that want to get away from it and say, let's call it BCE, before Common Era, or CE Common Era. It's like, okay, when did it change from before Common Era to Common Era? The birth of Christ. They can't get away from it. So here's a quote from Clarence Mannion. He's the dean of the Notre Dame School of Law back in 1951. He writes a best-selling book, Keys to Peace. But he says, the long march of measured time suddenly stopped and did an about-face, and started to march in another direction and to a different drum straight through the ensuing centuries of Christ and Christendom, BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. each mark the only reliable milestones on the path of world history. The end of the first time chain, the beginning of the second, came together on the night that Christ was born in Bethlehem.
Wow.
The first Christmas day thus stands as the great divide for the timing and recording of all people and things and events that have lived or taken place on this earth. The one place on a long, long trail of time where the magnetic needle of history stands vertical and points up.
Exactly. Wow.
Isn't
How
that beautiful?
significant, how significant, Bill. I mean, that is just so significant. No other person, no other figure in the history of the world has done this. Only Jesus.
Yeah, so 2023, what? AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord's reign. It's just fascinating that it can be so obvious, yet some people miss it. And now I have in my book, and the title of the book is "There Really Is a Santa Claus: The History of Saint Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions." I go through Saint Nicholas's story. And if you'd like, I can go through that for the.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, we're doing this for our audience. They've got their cup of cocoa. This is Christmas Day, and we're giving them some history and probably something they did not know about. So again, bringing it back into focus. So yes, let's talk about Saint Nick.
So the church was born into a one-world anti-Christian government, the Roman Empire. I don't know, you or me starting a group, we'd say, give it a couple years with there not being attacked. No, immediately the church is attacked. 11 of the 12 apostles are martyred. The 12th one, John, was thrown in oil but survived.
Right.
And then you have 3 centuries of government persecution of Christians. They're thrown to the lions. They had churches in catacombs, caves. They'd dig in the hillside and they'd have to meet in secret. Every time they met for church, they risked their lives.
Yes.
And so you had a emperor, Diocletian, and he is so cruel. He erects a monument to the extermination of Christianity. The story is he loses some battles with Persia, and he asks his generals why. And they said that it was his fault because he had neglected having the Roman army worship the Roman gods. So Diocletian says, okay, army, get back to worshiping the Roman gods. Well, this is the 3rd century AD. Lots of Christians in the military because the previous emperor, Gallienus, had been a little lax. And the Christians could not go back to worshiping Roman gods, so they're purged. Once all the Christians were purged out of the military, Diocletian decided to use the military to force the entire Roman Empire to return to worshiping the Roman gods, and started this worst persecution where they'd arrest the pastors, tear down the churches, cut out their tongues, destroy the scriptures, and it just went on and on. So it was during this time that Nicholas was alive. So St. Nicholas is the most popular Greek Orthodox saint. He is to the Greeks what St. Peter is to Roman Catholics.
Right.
And there are more Greek Orthodox churches named after Nicholas than anybody else. And so the story is that he lived in a town called Patara, Asia Minor. Today, that's Turkey. And a movement swept through Christianity called Pietism or monasticism, where they'd have the monasteries. And it was, if you really became a Christian, you would give away all your money and live in a cave as a hermit and just enjoy your personal relationship with God, or join a monastery, take vows of silence so we won't even hear from you again.
Right.
You'll just enjoy your personal relationship with Jesus. And so Nicholas does this, but he wants to give away his money anonymously because he wants the credit to go to God and not to him. So he would sneak into the town at nighttime and throw money in the window of poor people. Supposedly it landed in a shoe or a stocking that's drying by the fireplace. And one story that was popular was a merchant in the town had gone bankrupt. And back then the creditors would not only come and take your house and lands, they would take your children.
Right.
The merchant had 3 daughters. He knew if they were taken, it would be terrible life, maybe sex trafficking. And so the father had an idea. He thought if he could hurry up and marry his daughters off, the creditors wouldn't take them. Unfortunately, he did not have money for a dowry, which was needed in that area of the world for a legally recognized wedding. Nicholas hears the problem, throws money in the window. The oldest daughter has a dowry, gets married, big buzz, talk of the town, throws money in for the second daughter. And when he does it for the third, by this time the dad's expecting it. He runs outside and catches Nicholas. And Nicholas makes the father promise not to tell where the money came from because he wanted the credit to go to God. And so that's the origin of the tradition of secret gift giving on the anniversary of Nicholas's death, which was December 6th, 343 AD, the midnight visits from St. Nicholas, the stockings by the fireplace, and all the rest. And so he, again, is like the founding father of the Greek Orthodox Church. And one of the little sort of silly trivia things is he's the patron saint of pawnbrokers.
Exactly.
So Nicholas has these 3 bags of gold he threw in the windows for these daughters. Well, pawnbroker shops will have 3 gold balls hanging in front of their shop or on their sign. And that's to symbolize those 3 bags of gold that Nicholas threw in the window. And pawnbrokers say, well, we help families out in their time of financial need. And it's like, yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch, but whatever. So Nicholas, once he gives away all his money, he decides to join a monastery. Goes over to Zion in Jerusalem, and before he takes his final vows, the Lord tells him not to hide his light under a bushel. So he goes back to Asia Minor, today that's Turkey, gets off at a big city called Myra. Today that's Demre, Turkey. And unbeknownst to him, the bishop had died, and the church leaders could not decide who their next bishop was going to be. And one of them has a dream that the first one to church the next day would be named Nicholas, and he was to be their bishop. Well, Nicholas, sure enough, first one in the door, they ask his name and they say, you're supposed to be the bishop. He was not too happy because the Roman Emperor Diocletian was arresting bishops and killing them. So it's like, you be the bishop. No, you first. No, seriously, you and he agrees. He's arrested. He's put in jail. And while he's in jail, the church is praying. And Diocletian is struck with an intestinal disease so painful, he abdicates the throne on May 1st, 305 AD. I mean, here's an emperor. By this time, they're calling themselves a god with a little g, sprinkling gold dust in there.
Right, exactly.
Worship. So this was like a god resigning. The next emperor, Galerius, continues the persecution. He's struck with an intestinal disease. He dies in 311 AD. And now there's no emperor, and there's 4 generals who decide to fight it out. 2 are defeated, comes down to Constantine and Maxentius. Constantine leaves Britain, where he had been stationed, and he's marching toward the Milvian Bridge in Rome, and reportedly sees the sign of Christ in the sky, which is the first 2 Greek letters for the name Christ. So we abbreviate states with 2 letters. You know, California is CA. And, well, the Greeks would abbreviate names with the first 2 letters. And the first letter of the name Christ is written as an X, and it's called the Chi. And the second letter that makes the sound for Christ is written as a big P, and it's called Rho. So the Chi Rho is written as a big X and a P.
And a P,
And so over the centuries, it got shortened just to the Chi, the X. It was called the Christ's Cross or crisscross. And it became a form of a written oath. So you would sign at the Christ cross. Today, that's signed at the X.
Right, exactly.
And then they would, you get Xmas. So it's not X crossing out Christ. It's the Greek letter Chi, which stood for Christ.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And then it was on the bottom of Valentine's, where you'd put the X to be a sign before Christ that you're going to keep your word, and the O symbolized the kiss to show sincerity. Constantine legalizes Christianity in 313 AD, Edict of Milan. Christians come out of the catacombs, meet in these nice marble basilicas, and Nicholas is let out of jail, and he preaches against paganism. So nearby was the temple to Diana at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, twice as big as the Parthenon, 127 huge pillars, and temple prostitutes. It was the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean. Even the Apostle Paul preached against Diana worship in Acts chapter 19. And they all, great is Diana, the goddess of the Ephesians, and they chanted for 2 hours, right? So Paul preaches against Diana worship. Nicholas preaches against Diana worship, and they tear the temple to Diana down. So he would have been a preacher today against all the sexual agenda that's going on.
Exactly. Mm.
He preached against exposure of unwanted infants. It was the Roman version of abortion. So the Roman mother would bear the child, lay it at the father's feet. If the father picked it up, they would keep it. But if the father thought it didn't look healthy or they didn't have enough money, the mother would have to put the baby in a basket and set it out in the woods and expose it to the elements and let it die.
Oh, wow.
And as these Christians became more and more, the Roman women would put their baby in a basket and put it on the Christian's doorstep and knock on the door and then run away. And then the baby would be saved. But
Right.
Nicholas preached against exposure of unwanted infants. He preached against divination. That's where they would cut open an animal and look at its gizzards and try to predict the future. And then the Arian heresy started.
It's amazing, Bill, how they come up with some of these traditions. It's like, who thought of that? Who thought of cutting up an animal and look at his intestines and then try to come up with some, I guess, reading tea leaves was too ordinary, or casting lots was just too ordinary. We're just going to open up an animal, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Romans actually had courses for their priests on how to interpret a liver. It's like, okay. Wow. And then you had, what was it in one of the books in the Old Testament? It says, the king of Babylon is marching toward a fork in the road, and he offers a sacrifice and consults his priest as to go which way or the other. And he decides he's going to go toward Jerusalem and sack it, but that's what they would do, this divination. And Nicholas preached against it. And then the Arian heresy. So a bishop named Arius said Jesus was a created being, a little less than God. He writes a catchy song. The Visigoths, who were immigrants into Rome, converted to this Arianism, and it's splitting the church. And since Constantine had made the church the de facto religion of the Roman Empire, it's splitting the Roman Empire. Political fallout. So Constantine orders and pays for all the bishops from around the world to come together for the first time. It's called the Council of Nicaea. Mm-hmm. They settle the heresy with the Nicene Creed. Exactly. And they excommunicate Arius. And the tradition is that Nicholas was there because Nicaea was close to Myra, mm-hmm. and that Nicholas slapped Arius across the face for starting the Arian heresy. Oh, so wow. Jolly old Saint Nick had a little temper. Better watch out if he's coming to town.
Yeah.
And
well, he's the one that's marking who's naughty or nice. So he's in control of that. So
yeah. And so
nothing to worry about. Yeah.
The Greeks have lots of stories. Some are more believable than others, but one of them is there was a famine. They get Nicholas. He goes to the docks because it's a port city, mm-hmm. and talks some of the sailors into unloading their grain. They're coming from the Egypt, North Africa, through area Asia Minor over to Rome. Talks them into unloading their grain to feed his people, promising God would bless them. On their return trip, they said that the grain that was left had multiplied. Sort of like the little widow in the meal barrel that Elijah was with. And then another story is there was a storm. Sailors and fishermen could not get back safely to the docks. They get Nicholas. He prays. The sea becomes calm, sort of like Jesus prayed and the sea became calm. And so he's the patron saint of sailors, in addition to pawnbrokers. Mm-hmm. And then he confronted corrupt politicians.
Wow.
And so there was a governor who was doing corrupt, dirty, under the table stuff behind closed doors, and some 3 soldiers had found out about it, and he decided he's going to execute the soldiers. Sort of like today, maybe there's a corrupt politician and somebody knows about their dirt, and lo and behold, they find them suicided or on a body count list or something, right?
Exactly.
And so Nicholas hears about the execution, goes down to the city square, breaks through the crowd, grabs the sword out of the executioner's hand and throws it down. And then in front of everybody, by the knowledge given him by the Holy Spirit, he begins to tell what this corrupt governor was doing. The governor knows that nobody could know the details other than God. And so he begs Nicholas to pray for him. And so lots of stories about him. Nicholas dies December 6th, 343 AD. And being the most popular Greek Orthodox saint, they had the tradition of gift giving on the anniversary of his death, December 6th. And then you have Justinian, is a Byzantine Roman emperor, Christian. He builds a church and names it after Nicholas in Myra, Demre, Turkey. And then Vladimir the Great, the Emperor of Russia, and he decides to get rid of his pagan gods, throw them in the Dnieper River. He's going to convert to monotheism. Some Jews come to him and present their faith, and he goes, yeah, but you offended your God, and he kicked you out of Jerusalem. Some Muslims go to him, and it says in the First Chronicle of Russia that Vladimir listened intently when the Muslims told him that paradise was filled full of virgins because he was fond of women. But then when they told him he could no longer drink, he said, we cannot have this religion because drink is the joy of the Russes, the Russians.
Right.
So I think it's funny that Russia didn't convert to Islam because Vladimir liked to drink. But then some Greek Orthodox ambassadors came, and they spoke Greek, the language of the New Testament. Their land was where John spoke and Paul spoke. And some ambassadors went to Constantinople into that Hagia Sophia church, 165 feet high, 102 foot across dome, 4 acres of gold mosaics. They said we felt like we were walking into heaven. And so Vladimir converts to Greek Orthodox Christianity and adopts Nicholas as the patron saint of Russia. That's why so many churches and czars are named Nicholas.
Right, exactly.
And then, am I doing okay time-wise?
No, you're doing good. We got about 20 minutes remaining, so just go right on through. This is awesome, Bill. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, the next is Islam began to invade and take control of the Mediterranean. In the year 846 AD, 11,000 Muslims invaded Rome, Italy, and they trashed the big Basilica of St. Peter's, and they trashed the bones of St. Peter. And the church, St. Paul's, outside the walls, they trashed the bones of St. Paul. So now it's in the year 1087, and the Muslims are invading the Eastern Roman Empire, and all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation are wiped out. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. I always got to concentrate. And they're coming toward Myra, and the Christians don't want the bones of their famous St. Nicholas destroyed, so they move them over to Italy, a little town on the Adriatic Sea called Bari, B-A-R-I. And the Pope that dedicates the church is Urban II. Now, people may not be up on their Pope names, but that's the same Urban II that goes to the Council of Clermont in 1095 AD and begs these European kings to send help to the Greeks. They do. It is called the First Crusade.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Richard the Lionheart led the Third Crusade. St. Louis led the 7th and 8th Crusades, corresponding with the Mongolian Hulagu Khan, the son of Genghis Khan. And Hulagu Khan sacked Baghdad, and they weren't supposed to spill the caliph's blood because he was royalty. So they wrapped him in a Persian blanket and had the horses trample him to death. Anyway, Hulagu Khan was pretty tough. But so you had these crusades, but now you have the remains of Nicholas in Italy, along with his gift-giving traditions, and the Italians like it so much that the gift-giving starts to overshadow the birth of Jesus. And so St. Francis of Assisi, he's known for getting rid of all the wealth, and he has his poor Franciscan friars who would walk barefoot and wear burlap sacks, and they would preach the simple gospel. And so so St. Francis of Assisi invented the creche scene, the nativity scene.
Right.
Saying all the gift giving is fine, but we got to get back to the reason for the season.
Exactly.
Jesus, the Son of God, was born in a manger and became man, Emmanuel, God with us. And then we got the Reformation in 1517 with Martin Luther. And he ends the saints' days, because by this time there is a saints' day for every day of the year.
Yeah, because it was a money raiser for them. Fun. It was a campaign, right?
Yeah, well, it was because Cologne would have they said, well, the 3 wise men, somehow got their bones and they buried them there. But you'd have all these pilgrims would come, and it was the big income to the city.
Yeah.
And, anyway, churches were filled full of relics and sepulchres and statues and side altars. And Martin Luther considered this a distraction. So he ends the saints' days in all these Protestant countries. But the Germans like the gift giving associated with the St. Nicholas Day. So Martin Luther moves all the gift giving to December 25th and says all gifts come from the Christ child. And the German pronunciation of Christ child is Christkindl, like kindergarten, kindergarten.
Right.
Kind means
Exactly.
child, Chris means Christ. And
Right.
so my daughter worked in Germany for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And every December 24th, they would say, the Christkindl's coming, the Christkindl's coming, the Christ child's coming, because that's when the kids would get the presents. And Martin Luther did something else. He put lights in the tree. And so if I can go down a little rabbit trail, we're all familiar with St. Patrick in the 5th century, evangelizing the Druid pagans in Ireland.
Right.
And using the 3-leaf clover to teach the Trinity, right? He was originally from Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from Britain, in the 700s, you have St. Boniface, also called Winfrid, and he goes through the woods to Germany and goes to these Germanic tribes who are worshiping Thor. That's where you get the word Thor's Day.
Right. Oh.
Thursday is Thor's Day, and Thor was a pagan god. So the Quakers refused to say Thursday. They would say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5th day, Friday, Saturday. Right. Anyway, so Thor lived in an oak tree, and St. Boniface had an axe, and he chops down Thor's tree. Someone said, well, stop him. And somebody else said, well, if Thor is really a god, he can protect his own tree.
Right.
And so in Fritzlar, Germany, there is a statue of St. Boniface standing on the stump of a big oak tree. It's a bronze statue with his axe in his hand, and with his other hand, he's holding a little church because he brought the church to the Germans. And then Boniface pointed at an evergreen tree, and he said, let this little child of the forest be a home tree tonight. It's call it the tree of the Christ child because it points toward heaven. Its leaves are evergreen, symbolizing everlasting life, and it's in the shape of a triangle. So the same way that the Patrick used a 3-leaf clover to teach the Trinity to the illiterate Druids, Boniface used the 3 sides of the evergreen tree to teach the Germanic tribes the Trinity. So the evergreen tree was symbolic of Germans converting to Christianity. But in the 1500s, Martin Luther's coming home, and the story is that he sees lights in the sky twinkling, and he puts the candles in the branches of the tree and tells his children, this is like the sky above Bethlehem on the night of Christ's birth.
Right.
And then also he could have seen the Hanukkah lights, because the Jews at this time of year would have their menorah, which goes back to 165 BC. And for those not familiar, Jews are taken captive to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
They let Cyrus of Persia lets them go back. They rebuild the temple. Persia is then conquered by Alexander the Great. He dies. 4 generals divide up his empire, and the Seleucid Empire is Persia, which includes the Holy Land. And there was a Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he wants to wipe out the Jewish faith. And these Jews do a guerrilla warfare, 165 BC, finally drive these Seleucids out, and they go into the temple that had been trashed for a few years, and they take the oil that takes a week to prepare. It's on one little flask, and they pour it in the candelabra, the 7 oil candlestick, and it miraculously stays lit for 8 days until they get the new oil prepared. And so that is why there's 8 candles in the menorah, plus the 9th is the shamash, which you use to light the others.
Exactly.
And, so the thought is that Martin Luther could have seen the Hanukkah candles twinkling in the windows of the Jews, and maybe that gave him the idea to put the candles in the light of the Christmas tree. And then we go to England. Am I doing okay?
Yeah, we're doing good. I'm taking notes, buddy.
And by the way, all this is in a book, and it's called There Really Is a Santa Claus, The History of St. Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions. England has Henry VIII bring the Reformation, but not because he had a spiritual experience like Martin Luther. He just wanted another wife, ended up having 6 wives.
Right.
And rather than focus back on the Christ child, like Martin Luther, Henry VIII brings back an old Roman holiday, Saturnalia. Now, you have to remember, Britain was a Roman colony since 55 BC when Julius Caesar first invaded. And the Romans had a festival at the end of the year. Saturn was their god of feasting and plenty and merriment. And in England, they sort of Christianized it. And but it was a lewd party. It was drinking, carousing, wassailing, where you drink some spiced ale and throw the rest of it on an apple tree for a nice harvest the next year, and gaming and, trying to pick up a date. I don't know. It was this party time, sort of like a Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
People forget Mardi Gras used to be a religious day.
Yes.
It was the day before Lent when you would fast 40 days before Easter and
Right.
celebrate Christ's resurrection. But now it's this lewd party in New Orleans. That's sort of what happened in England with Henry VIII. And now the god Saturn, if you've ever seen the Christmas Carol with Charles Dickens, there's the spirit of Christmas present.
Yes.
And it's this big guy with robes on, a wreath in his hair, goblet of wine, grapes all around, a happy ho-ho party guy.
Yeah.
And you're looking at him asking yourself, who is this guy? He sort of looks like Santa, but he also looks like some Roman god. Well, it was Saturn, but they Christianized him and called him Father Christmas. They could not call him Saint Nicholas because saints were outlawed because of the Reformation.
Right.
And so the Puritans movement began, and they wanted to purify the Church of England, and they did not like Christmas. And there's a Puritan leader, Cotton Mather, and he writes on Christmas Day in the year 1712, he says, "Can you in your conscience think that our holy Savior is honored by mad mirth and long eating and hard drinking and lewd gaming and rude reveling by a mass fit for none other than a Saturn or a Bacchus or a night of Mohammedan Ramadan? You cannot possibly think so. That at the birth of our Savior, for which we owe as high praises to God, we take time to please the hellish legions and do actions that have much more of hell than of heaven in them." And so the Puritans were so strict, they forbade Shakespeare from mentioning God in his plays. They considered it casting pearls before swine, taking God's name in vain, to mention God's holy name in front of a bunch of drunk theater goers in these dens of iniquity.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when Shakespeare wrote Midsummer's Night's Dream and these little fairies. And then Shakespeare wrote Twelfth Night, which was this carnivalesque drunken festival. And I'll tell you about the Twelfth Night in a moment. But in 1644, the Puritans tore down Shakespeare's theater. And so the Pilgrims, which branched off the Puritans, they come to America, Massachusetts. And the captain of the Mayflower, Christopher Jones, writes in his ship's log, December 25th, 1620, "At harbor in Plymouth, Christmas Day, but not observed by these colonists, they being opposed to all saints' days, etc.
Right.
A large party went ashore this morning to fell timber to begin building their first building," and so on and so forth. Now, the next year, a second boatload of pilgrims came. And Pilgrim Governor William Bradford writes, "One more incident rather amusing. On Christmas Day, the governor called the people out to work as usual. But most of the new company excused themselves and said it went against their consciences to work on that day. So the governor told them if they made it a matter of conscience, he would spare them till they were better informed. So he went with the rest to work and left them. But on returning from work at noon, he found them at play in the street, some pitching the bars, some at stool ball and such like sports. So the governor went and took away their games and told them it was against his conscience that they should play while others work. If they made keeping the day a matter of devotion, let them remain in their houses, but there should be no gaming and reveling in the streets." And in 1659, the Puritans had a 5-shilling fine for anybody caught celebrating Christmas. So the Pilgrims, Puritans, and most Presbyterians did not celebrate Christmas, but others did, particularly the Germans and French, and especially the Dutch.
Yes.
So most of what we have with St. Nicholas comes from the Dutch. The Dutch pronunciation of St. Nicholas is Sant Nicolaas. Santa Claus.
Okay.
So Santa Claus is the Dutch pronunciation of St. Nicholas.
Right.
And if we can look at the Dutch, it sort of gets even more fun. There's a Catholic saying, St. Peter's at the gates of heaven.
Yes.
Well, the Greeks do a similar with the book of Revelation, where Jesus will return at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead, riding a white horse. And the saints will come back with him, riding white horses. And St. Nicholas is a saint, so he will be one of those riding a white horse. But he's so special to the Dutch, he gets to come back once a year for a little mini judgment, a little checkup on the kids, make sure they're on the right track, see who's naughty, see who's nice. And so to this day in Holland, the Netherlands, St. Nicholas comes dressed as a bishop riding a white horse. And you begin to see the change where the Lamb's Book of Life and the Book of Works turns into the Book of the Naughty and the Nice.
Right,
And
exactly.
the saints come from where? Heaven, the celestial city, the New Jerusalem, that turns into the North Pole. And in Norway, they didn't have horses, so he's riding a reindeer. And the angels turn into the elves. So you see what it started with biblical theme sort of gets a little bit off. And so the Dutch settled New York in 1624. It actually was called New Amsterdam. And the Dutch founded a church. And the name of the church was the St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church. And it lasted for centuries. It was the oldest continuous congregation in America.
Wow.
And they built a big cathedral in New York City, right at the corner of 5th Avenue and 48th Street. And even Teddy Roosevelt attended there. And then as New York City became more financial, church membership dropped, and the church elders sold it for millions of dollars to Standard Oil Company, Sinclair Oil Company, who tore the cathedral down and built an oil building. The congregation merged with the Marble Collegiate Dutch Reformed Church, where people like Norman Vincent Peale was the pastor, and even Donald Trump went there. And so in New York is where we have a transition of the St. Nicholas. So we went from the real Greek saint, and then we went to the Dutch. He's still a bishop coming once a year, but in New York, you have Washington Irving, and he would write these fanciful history stories like Rip Van Winkle and Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And he created the name Gotham for, New York City.
Right.
Paul Bunyan's Blue Ox, right? So it's like, it's got some history mixed in with some fanciful stuff. Well, he writes Dietrich Knickerbocker's A History of New York from the beginning of the New World to the end of the Dutch dynasty in 1809. Now, Dietrich Knickerbocker is a fictitious name, but it was so popular that you have the New York Knicks basketball team, right?
That's right. Exactly.
And so he writes in his Dietrich Knickerbocker's History of New York, St. Nicholas rode over the housetops, drawing forth magnificent presents, dropping them down the chimneys of his favorites. Now he visits but one night a year, rattles down the chimneys, confining his presents merely to children. Stockings in the morning found mysteriously filled. But Washington Irving describes St. Nicholas dressed not as a bishop, but in a typical Dutch outfit of a leather belt, a long pair of trunk hose, a stocking hat, and even added in there a large pipe. And laying his finger beside his nose, gave a significant look, mounting his wagon, and returned over the treetops and disappeared. And so now in New York, 1823, you have another addition to the story, Clement Moore.
Yes.
He is a Hebrew professor and at the Episcopal Seminary. Matter of fact, his family donated the land for the Episcopal Seminary. There is a park in New York called the Clement Moore Park at 10th Avenue and 22nd Street. And he writes a poem for his 6 children titled A Visit from St. Nicholas. And we all know it. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there.
Right.
And what to my wondering eye should appear but a miniature sleigh and a tiny reindeer and a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. So he's still called St. Nicholas, but he is a chubby, plump, right jolly old elf. I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. So he shrunk in size. Now he's just an elf. And then 2 more installments in the next one is Thomas Nast. He is a Civil War illustrator for Harper's Weekly magazine. And you know him because he invented the Republican elephant and the Democrat mule.
Exactly. Yes.
And Thomas Nast did a cover for Harper's Weekly magazine during the Civil War of Santa Claus addressing the Union troops with the North Pole sign in the background. And it was a political jab at the South to say St. Nicholas is associated with the North.
Right.
And finally, you have Coca-Cola. And they hire an artist, Haddon Sundblom. And you know him because he invented the Quaker Oats Man and Aunt Jemima syrup. And he does a painting of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, drinking Coke. And Coca-Cola pioneered mass marketing. It's the best trademark name in the world. And every year for 33 years, Haddon Sundblom did another painting of Santa Claus. But now he's full grown again. And he's got rosy cheeks, ruddy complexion, a nice huggable grandfather. And that's the image spread around the world. But we remind ourselves that if you peel back all the layers, there really was a man who lived in the 4th century over in Asia Minor, who loved Jesus and went into the ministry and was imprisoned by the government for his Christian faith. And he gets out, he preaches against the pagan sexual immorality. He preaches against exposure of unwanted infants. He would have been a pro-life preacher. He preaches defending the Trinity at the Council of Nicaea, but we remember him most because he was generous and helped poor families in their time of need, but he wanted the credit to go to God alone.
Wow. There's the full circle of it. What a tradition, Bill. You know how this all has evolved. And it's amazing. It's as if, the divine hand of providence is about this story in a way, even though some may resist and say, well, there's some pagan influence in that, but but how it ties back into our Christian roots. It's amazing, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mentioned the 12 days of Christmas. Back in the year 567 AD, there was a dispute. Western Europe wanted to celebrate December 25th as the holiest day, and Eastern Europe wanted to celebrate January 6th, Epiphany, the visit of the 3 wise men, the revealing of Christ to the world. They could not decide which day was holier. So they decided to make all 12 days from December 25th to January 6th the 12 days of Christmas.
Right.
And they called them holy days. And over the centuries, holy day got pronounced holiday. And so when they say, don't say Merry Christmas, just say Happy Holidays. It's like a happy holiday means holy day. And what are the holy days but the 12 days of Christmas? So you can't get everything. Now, in Western Europe, Christmas, December 25th, for 2,000 years was the most important day. So Clovis, the king of the Franks, is baptized with 3,000 of his soldiers on Christmas Day in the year 496 AD. And so this is when France becomes Christian. And then 597 AD in Britain, 10,000 Anglo-Saxons are baptized and become Christian by St. Augustine of Canterbury near the banks of the Swale Inlet, near the Sheppey and mainland of Kent, right? And then Charlemagne is crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800. His grandfather was Charlemagne, who stopped the Muslims from invading France. And then you have St. Stephen of Hungary is crowned king on Christmas Day in the year 1000. And then King Mizico II Lambert is crowned king of Poland on Christmas Day in the year 1025. William the Conqueror is crowned king of England in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day in the year 1066 AD. And there's literally dozens of kings that are crowned on Christmas Day. And then Columbus sails to the New World, and his main ship, the Santa Maria, is shipwrecked on Haiti on Christmas Eve, 1492. And so he leaves 40 sailors and names the settlement La Navidad. And then you have Revolutionary War. and George Washington crosses the Delaware River on Christmas Day evening, 1776, and he wins the Battle of Trenton.
Wow.
So Trenton, New Jersey, the British had hired German Hessian troops, and sort of the legend is that these German troops were not on their peak alertness because the Germans like to celebrate Christmas, and some dispute that, but others don't. And
hey, Bill, we got about a minute left, and but would it be possible in this last minute to gather? You mentioned the 12 days of Christmas, and for some people that have not been able to understand and heard what the 12 days of Christmas and what each present represents, can you do something real quick to kind of summarize the 12 days of Christmas to give us a wrap on this show?
So there was a famous song written in 1625 called "In Those 12 Days." And they think this is what turned into our song. But it said, in those 12 days, in those 12 days, God's powers made all things. What is that which is but one? God alone in heaven and earth, he sits on his throne. What are they that are but two? The Old Testament and the New. What are they but all but three? Three persons of the Trinity. What are they but all but four? The four sweet evangelists. What are they but five? The five senses. The 6 days that we labor. The 7 liberal arts and the 8 beatitudes and 9 muses with sacred tunes. What are they which are but 10? 10 statutes which God gave Moses. What are they but are but 11? 11,000 virgins suffered for the sake of Jesus. What are they but are but 12? 12 attending on God's Son, the 12 apostles.
Exactly, 12 apostles, right.
That was a really popular song. And so they think that's what morphed into our song.
Well, there it is. Well, as we wrap things up, remind everybody of the books we've been featuring and talking about here and how they can get their hands on your book.
Well, thank you, Bill. My website is AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. And the title of the book is There Really Is a Santa Claus, The History of St. Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions.
Well, Bill Federer, I cannot thank you enough. Merry Christmas. Thank you for making this Christmas so special and reminding us of all these rich traditions. I know for those of us that were taking notes and paying attention that Christmas is, going to have an even deeper meaning because of this background that we've had in all these traditions, how they developed and how after everything is all said and done, it still points to the Christ child, doesn't it?
Amen. Amen. There's Mark chapter 10 says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Amen. God is a just God. He cannot change his nature. Was, is, and forever will be just, which means he has to judge every sin. If God does not judge a sin, by his default, his silence would be giving consent to the sin. If God gives consent to one sin one time, he denies himself, and he cannot deny himself, so we could never be loved back. But he came up with a plan before the foundations of the world, and his own son would become the lamb and take the judgment. So God is just in that he judges every sin, but he's love in that he provided the lamb to take the judgment. The lamb is God's way to love you without having to judge you.
Right.
It's his plan. He came up with it. So he can love you for the rest of eternity. You can love him back and not have to worry about being judged by him, because all the judgment you deserve went on Jesus, the Lamb of God, who was born at Christmas.
Takes away the sins of the world. He is the American Minute creator and historian. Bill Federer has been our guest. Bill, again, Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care. God bless.
Oh, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Yes, you got it. And our thanks to you for sharing a part of your Christmas day with us. May God bless you and keep you. May make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thanks again for being with us. Merry Christmas, everybody.